What if you could take that risk, make that change, reach that goal, live your best life? Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast, where we get together with amazing experts and everyday people who share challenges, encourage healing, and explore the possibilities that life has to offer. I'm your host, Gary Scott, and I'm excited that you're along for the ride.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast. And today, my wonderful guest, all the way from Singapore, is Will Thomas. Hello, Will Thomas.
Hello, glad to be here. Thanks for having the conversation today.
Oh, absolutely. I love your topic. I what you've done is amazing. It's very rare in the world, and so I'm excited to touch on it. And so I'm gonna just read your bio real quick, and we'll get cooking.
Okay.
Cool biz. Everybody, we have Will Thomas. Only began running at age 42, but he went on to become one of the few people in the world to complete the Marathon Grand Slam. Now, that's running a marathon on all seven continents and the North Pole. Now in his late 50s, he continues to run three or four marathons. First marathon. That's actually at Mount Everest, by the way, which you thought he was crazy before, folks. That just kind of nailed. In the years since the Grand Slam, having shared the pursue your dreams. As Will puts it, the fact that a middle-aged consultant can do what I've done is proof that age alone should never stop you. What's more important is your own drive and effort. So, welcome, Will Thomas. I'm excited to jump into this. But I do have to ask my one question, if that's okay with you.
Mhm.
So,
Absolutely.
Will Thomas, have you ever had a what if you could?
I absolutely have. And there's actually been quite a few of them along the way. So I like to think that they've kind of built up and built some momentum over time. But I think a big one for me was when I got started running. And I was not an in shape person. I was getting by, but I wasn't doing great. And I wanted to start running. And I thought, well, what if I could get out there and do it? And initially, I thought, I don't think I can. But what really got me through that was a good friend who had just run his first marathon, and he said, "Look," he said, "if you want to run, if you're worried that you're going to, quit and get bored and just stop after a while," he said, "do this. Uh, Sign up to run a marathon with me next year, and then when you tell everybody you're going to do it, you won't back out and you won't get bored and you won't quit." And so that was really what did it for me was that accountability. So there was the question of can you do this physically? And I wasn't quite sure. But the more important question was can you do this mentally? And and I needed to find a way to get around that hurdle. And that's what it was. Just telling everyone I was going to do it, coming on a podcast, telling people I'm going to run a race. That means you can't get out of it.
How long did it take you to train, not being a runner and haven't really run a lot? I mean, how long did it take you to train for that first marathon?
So I got started running in January, and this was January of 2008. My first run was probably 3 miles, I think, and I was dragging by the end of it. But, again, following the advice of good friends who had done this before, I was able to run my first marathon 9 months later. I ran the Marine Corps Marathon in Washington, D.C. in October that year. Yeah, I mean, I went from zero to marathon in 9 months.
That's, that's awesome. When you talk in your book about, the two lines, there's two lines to a
Mhm.
marathon. You say the finish line and you say this the starting line. But I've always thought there's three lines to a marathon because there's that wall, right, that you hit at like 17, 18 miles, right? And it's like
Yeah.
That's could be a finish line for a lot of people. It's like, dude, I'm done. I've done pretty good. I can't, I'm not gonna go anymore. Um, did you hit that in your first marathon? Did you hit the wall?
Oh, I absolutely did. And I have a very vivid memory of it. Um, and it was right around 17, 18 miles. I was coming through Washington, D.C. I had been running past the Smithsonian Museum and was about to turn onto a bridge back into Virginia. And this was, and bear in mind, this was almost 17 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember approaching that bridge, which was a wide open space, but it felt like I slammed into a wall right at the base of the bridge. And, uh, and I knew this was going to come. Everybody had said it. Um, and they said get ready for it. And really it's at that point, it's as much a mental game as a physical. In fact, probably more of a mental game than a physical. And you just have to tell yourself, I've trained at this distance. I know there's a finish line out there somewhere. I just have to keep pushing through it. And yeah, that wall is real, but it's also something you can overcome.
Yeah, it's a bizarre thing. I mean, 100 years ago, I ran a marathon, and I
Hmm.
really trained hard. I was doing 15, 18 miles a day, 5, 6 days a week. I like way overtrained, but I was like, 18 years old, so it was like different than 42 years old, right? And I was super stoked, and everyone told me about it, and then when I hit it, it's like, oh man, you guys, if you hadn't have told me about it, maybe it wouldn't have been there, but it's there. I don't care
It's
what
there.
anybody says. Now you were you were in the Air Force. Where were you
Right.
stationed when you were towards the end of there, when you were a lieutenant colonel?
So towards the end, I was at the Pentagon. I was in Washington, D.C., and I was working on a unique mission area. If you ever read the stories about uh, bringing an individual back who was lost in the Vietnam War and World War II, and we've identified their remains and brought them back. That's what I did. That's where I worked. But I had taken a few months and had gone to Afghanistan. A former commander of mine was doing some work over there and he asked for another pair of hands. And so I went to help out. And the only thing to do in Afghanistan is work and work out. So that was where I started getting in somewhat better shape. And when I got back to Washington, D.C., I thought I'd like to hold on to this. I'd like to keep this fitness that I've started on. And that was what made me think, well, maybe I should start running and doing all of that. But yeah, Washington, D.C. was a great place to be a runner. A lot of
Yeah.
great running trails. The Marine Corps Marathon. Wow, what a great way to start your marathon experience. It's fantastic.
Yeah, my son actually is in the Air Force, and
Oh,
he works at Andrews Air Force Base. He runs the kennels there at Andrews, and
oh,
so
so
we've been
cool.
fortunate to go back and visit a couple of times, and did the White House tour, and Washington is a ridiculously amazing, beautiful city. It's got its issues like every big city, but I mean,
Sure.
really, right there in that heart where everything is, the Smithsonian and all the museums, and you really feel like, wow, this is a great place. It's beautiful there.
Yeah, and there is so much to do there. I mean, obviously, of course, that's where the history is, I guess, a lot of it anyway. I had a number of opportunities. I went to school at the University of Virginia. That was my undergraduate, which is about 2 hours from DC. So I spent a lot of time up there. I went to graduate school, got my PhD at George Mason University, which is right outside of Washington. So lived there for 3 years during that, and then, of course, came back for my final assignment at the Pentagon. But yeah, it's a really good place. And again, it also gives you access to the whole East Coast. So, I ran the New York City Marathon coming out of there. I ran races in the Eastern US, in Ohio, and other places. So you've got access to a lot of stuff from there also.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know you just can't walk up and run a lot of the marathons that you've entered. Like right? I mean, don't you have to qualify for the New York and the Boston and a lot of these marathons? You can't just like go, I'm gonna go show up and run, right? You have to qualify for these. So how
Right.
many marathons have you run?
So, well, one thing I should clarify is there are races that you can sign up for and pretty much be guaranteed to get in, typically smaller ones. There are others, usually the World Marathon Majors like New York, Chicago, Tokyo, and the others. where you ballot, you enter a lottery, and they may have 300,000 people for 30,000 spots, and you just, keep your fingers crossed. Um, and then there are others where you qualify, and Boston is one where you pretty much have to qualify to get in. And usually there are also some exceptions. So when I ran Boston, I didn't qualify based on time. I ran on behalf of a charity group, and they had a certain number of bibs set aside for that. So there's a number of ways to get in. But and I found in one case, and I can share the story where you can just walk up and run a marathon, and I was surprised. But so far, I've done 44 marathons. My
Wow.
45th is coming up here pretty soon, and I was averaging about 3 a year until COVID came along. That shut me down for a couple of years. Yeah.
Wow. I was just talking to a guy who actually just left to do the Berlin marathon. I think he's there now. I don't know. Has they already run it? I think I talked to him last week. But yeah, he's like, hey, I'm heading from here when we're wrapped up. I'm heading to Berlin. He was in Israel. And I go, wow,
Oh,
imagine going from Israel to Germany to run a marathon. Things have changed hopefully they don't change back. But
right.
so your buddy talks you into running a marathon. And reluctantly, you agreed. Then you told everyone you were going to do it, so you were screwed. Um, but then you went on this quest, like, well, I've done one. I'm going to run like all seven of the world's most important. How did you, where did this brainstorm come from?
Yeah, initially I was going to be just one and done with the marathon. I'd signed up for Marine Corps and I thought, I'll check this off the list and then I'll go do something else. And as I was approaching that race, I thought, well, this is a lot of work for one race. So I should look for something else. And I was going to be leaving for Singapore about a week later for my 4 months of teaching. I thought, well, let me see if there's something going on over there. And sure enough, 6 weeks later, there was the Singapore Marathon. And I thought, well, let me sign up for that. And then I looked at the calendar again, and 9 weeks after that was the Hong Kong Marathon. I thought, well, let me sign up for that. So in 15 weeks, I ran my first three marathons. And that's not advisable, by
Wow.
the way. I don't recommend
No.
that. But I was pretty hooked. I was pretty hooked at that point. I had run three marathons, three different countries, and it was a lot of fun. Um, but then a couple of years later, as I continued running, I got a little concerned because running a marathon had been the goal. And I found that I really needed a goal in front of me to keep doing things, to really keep driving forward. But I had achieved that goal. And I thought, I need something new. I need something different. And I happened to be looking around the internet just for different races. And I stumbled across this concept of the Marathon Grand Slam. And like you said, the idea is you run a marathon on all seven continents and at the North Pole. And so I said, okay, that'll do as a goal. That'll be good. And at the time
Right?
I was,
You think?
yeah, it's like if you're gonna aim, aim big, I guess. And I was just turning 44. I remember I was going to dinner with a friend of mine, and I said, before we go, I got to tell you about this because remember, you got to tell people you're going to do it because that accountability really helps. And I said, I'm 44 today. I said, by the time I'm 50, I will finish the Grand Slam. I will get it done. And it was really good for me because it was a long-term goal. It was going to take me years to get it done, so it would keep me going that whole time. It would be interesting. I'd be going to places that I hadn't been to before, places that I probably should visit, but I kind of needed a reason. Well, now I have a reason. Um, and it was going to keep me in shape, and what I didn't realize was that it was going to be the focal point of my life for the next 6 years. Every major decision I made was going to be based on how it affected the Grand Slam. So it was really helpful in that sense.
You know, I'm no meteorologist, but I think the weather in Singapore is a little bit different than the weather in the North Pole. So, how do you train to run 26.2 miles on the snow in not real friendly conditions in the North Pole? I mean, how do you train for that type of thing?
Yeah, that was going to be a shocker. Of course, we use the Celsius system over here, so I was going from 30 degrees Celsius in Singapore to minus 30. And that was the case in both Antarctica and the North Pole. Because for Antarctica, we ran on a glacier about 1,000 kilometers from the South Pole, about 600 miles from the South Pole. So very similar weather conditions there to what we would later experience, what I would later see in the North
Wait,
Pole.
wait, 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 wait.
Yes,
Wait, hold on a sec. Did you
yes.
just say you went and trained in the South Pole to run in the
Uh,
North Pole?
no, no, no. Well, no. I mean, I ran a marathon in Antarctica in 2014, and that was about a year and a half before I went to the North Pole. Because again, if I'm going to do the
How did
Grand
you end
Slam,
up
and
in
I'm
Antarctica to run a marathon? Wait a minute. We didn't know
yeah,
about Antarctica. That's not on the
yeah.
list.
Well, it's one of the seven continents, and if you're going to get them all done, you got to go to Antarctica. You got to go south.
That's
So
true.
yeah, so that was my seventh continent. And in 2014, I was living here in Singapore, and went to the Antarctic Ice Marathon, and it's a marathon held typically around November. And when I ran, it was mid-November, which is the summer in Antarctica. It's at a base camp on Union Glacier, which is about 600 miles from the South Pole. You fly in from Chile, you land there. The way the schedule worked back then, we were there for about 5 days, waiting. We ran the race and then came back. But yeah, it was about minus 30, so somewhere close to 17 or 18 below Fahrenheit. Yeah, 17 or 18 below
Wow.
zero.
A
Yeah.
lot of people don't realize that the cold will dehydrate you faster than the heat will dehydrate you. So, how did you prepare for, I mean, that much water loss and to be, that much dehydration? Because it's drier there than a desert.
It is. And that was something I didn't really know until I was getting ready to go. So I've learned a lot about different parts of the world because suddenly I was going to be there ready to race. And and yeah, Antarctica is classified as a desert because of how dry it actually is, which isn't something you expect when you're watching National Geographic specials, and you don't think that's the case. But
You don't see a lot of real
no,
dehydrated penguins and stuff. You think,
you do not.
there's plenty of water everywhere, right?
Yeah, yeah, but it's all frozen, and that's a different kind of water. So yeah, we on the dehydration side, I was actually fairly well prepared because of my experience in Singapore. With the high heat and humidity here, the importance of hydrating while running is beaten into your head pretty much from day one. Having said that, I didn't hydrate enough in Antarctica, and I did have some dehydration problems by the end of the race. But checked in with the doctor, and she said, "Well, you know where my tent is, so come see me tonight if you have a problem." But I was okay by the time I was done. The challenge, as you pointed out, was first of all running the temperatures, and then secondly running on snow. Um, and as far as the running on snow, what I did here was I ran on the beaches. So here in Singapore, also up in Thailand, I went and I trained on the beaches because the consistency of the sand is similar to what you're going to experience when you're running on the snow and ice in Antarctica or farther north in the Arctic. Where I couldn't really train was the cold. And there's just no way I can simulate that here. Now, I had a friend from California who had a buddy who managed a grocery store. Now, he set up a treadmill in the freezer and he practiced.
I've heard about that. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
going to ask you
yeah.
about that. I've heard
So
that
people
people
really do
actually
that.
it's kind of like Rocky punching meat like that.
Exactly.
But yeah, dudes actually throw a treadmill in freeze lockers. It's crazy.
They do. They do. And it works. I had looked into doing something like that here. I had gone to a skating rink and had talked to them about what facilities they had. But what I've discovered is that when you go up to non-runners and say, I'm going to run a marathon in Antarctica, I mean, the conversation shuts down at that point. I mean, because they have trouble just grasping that concept. So when you start
You
asking
start
about
calling for
running,
security is what
oh
happens.
yeah,
People start calling
yeah.
security.
When I was buying my shoes for that, I remember going to the New Balance store where I typically got my shoes, and I pulled the guy aside and I said, "Now I'm going to go run a marathon in Antarctica, so I need to talk to you about what kind of trail shoes I need for that." And he just nodded and said, "Okay." And I looked at him and I said, "You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you?" And he said, "No."
And I don't want to know. I don't
And
want to
I
know
don't
what
want to
you're
know.
doing. I'm going
I
to
don't want
call
to
my
know.
manager. Um, Now, which one of it? I always forget. Is it the North Pole or the South Pole that's kind of off limits? Where like people don't aren't really allowed to go to. Which one is it?
So it's more so Antarctica. There's the Antarctic Treaty, which has been around since I think the 1950s, that puts a lot of limitations on who can go there and what they can do. So there are research centers, there's some tourism in Antarctica, but they have to follow some very, very strict limits on that. And for example, you can't leave anything behind. So it's not just taking your trash out, it's anything you might create as a person has to be shipped back out on an airplane. Um, the Arctic region, the North Pole, has some limitations as well, particularly around military use and commercialization and so forth. But for the base camp we were at up there, which was about 30 miles from the geographic North Pole, there weren't too many legal limitations. It was just a climate limitation. You only had about a month that you could be there before the ice would get so thin that it couldn't support the airplane anymore, and you couldn't get in or out. So that was more of a climate limitation than a legal one. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, it's not like a regular marathon where guys are on the side handing you water and lip gloss and Vaseline for your thighs, and you just drink it and toss it and drink it and toss it. You're not doing that at the South Pole, bro. They're gonna come after you for that. But yeah, that's pretty interesting because the aliens, they keep the aliens at the South Pole. That's why they don't want anyone there. I'm positive.
Well, I can neither confirm nor deny. Um, it's interesting, actually. A couple of years ago, there was a story making the rounds of the of certain sites on the internet showing Garmin and Strava tracks of people in Antarctica. And what they were saying on these sites was that this was the underground facility where they were keeping the aliens. What it was us. It was the marathon. It was people running in a
No
circle.
shit.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. That's a great story. Yeah,
Um,
you are a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, so if anybody knows, you would know. So I know on the down low, when we get off the recording, you're going to tell me what's going on up there.
I'll
But
tell you all about it. I'll tell you all about it. The little green men and how much beer
all
they
that
drink.
good stuff.
Yes,
So
yes,
Will, while you're doing all this stuff,
yeah.
um, when does the book pop into your head? The book is Cross the Line. So when do you go, I'm going to write a book about my adventures and how just a guy from regular old Joe decides to do something that, I mean, how many people have done it? How many people have got the Grand Slam, or how many have done the seven continents
Yeah,
plus?
so yeah, so the Grand Slam, I'd have to double check because there was a North Pole Marathon a couple of months ago, but I believe it's around 146 people who
Wow.
have done it. I was the
In the
82nd
entire
one to
history
complete
of
it.
the world, with
Yeah,
9
yeah,
billion people, there's
yeah.
146 people that are actually crazy enough to do that.
That's right.
That's a
That's
massive
right.
achievement, my friend. I mean, think about it. I mean, there's not a lot of things in the world where you could say there's only about 150 people who have done what I've done. So that's
Yeah.
quite impressive.
Yeah, it's something, to be honest, I included on my resume. When I'm out there job hunting, I make sure that that's on there.
Does
If
it
only
help or
because it's
does
a
it
convers
hurt? I don't know.
it
Does it help or does
it
it
tends
hurt?
to it tends to help because it's a conversation starter. People want to talk to you. They'll take the interview just to hear that story. They're like, wait, what are you talking about? And then it can lead to other things. And actually, it's contributed to my business, at different times in my career as well. But the book came about, I guess it was after I had run in Antarctica, and I was running a marathon in Singapore one day. And I have a lot of time to think because I'm not fast. I should qualify this. I am not a fast runner. So I have a lot of time to think out there, especially when I run a race in Singapore where I tend to be even slower. And I got to thinking about kind of the lessons I had learned from running. And by this time I had started my own business and there were things I had learned from running that were contributing to how I run my business. And I thought, wow, this would make a good blog post or something. This is when, people were still writing blogs a lot. And I thought, yeah, I could do like, 10 things I've learned from running marathons. And then I thought, actually I could probably turn this into a little talk, like a 1 hour talk. And as I kept thinking about it during that run, I thought there's a lot more stories than just a talk or a blog. And I realized that not only the things I had learned while running, but also the things that had happened between the races were things that have really helped me out in the years since then. And I thought, well, okay, let me go ahead and get all this down on paper and share all of this. And so what was supposed to be, 10 things I learned from running basically turned into an autobiography and a sports book and a travel log and such. But it was a fun experience because I had been running for years by the time I sat down and put it on paper. And it was great because it got me to go back and revisit all of those experiences and really think about them in ways that I hadn't before. So I like that kind of reflection. And I think that's really valuable. It's a way that you really take learning away from experiences to stop afterwards and really, really think hard about it.
My wife and I are scuba divers. She's a scuba instructor and she's big time. I mean, I actually have a real job. I'm not just an international podcasting superstar. I actually have a real job. But she's been all over the world, Philippines, Egypt, all over the place diving. But we divers keep dive logs. Now they're on our dive computer, but I still keep an old dive book. You write in it where you were, what you saw, what you did, and who your dive buddy was, and we sign them and stuff like that. I still like the old dive books. Do you have something like that? I mean, did you ever keep journals of some of these runs that you were doing, or did you just the book just came from memory? It all just kind of came flooding back.
I had written a lot of stuff down, and I used to be a scuba diver as well, so I know what you mean about the dive logs, and it's fun to go back and look at those from 20 or 30 years ago. Uh, so I had done something like that. I used to keep just a personal blog that I would write to share with my friends, and so I had little race stories, race reports, but also discussions about the training and things that I had been doing in between the races, and so I was able to go back to that. I had also kept physical copies of books when I was at the camp in Antarctica. And then when I was in the North Pole, of course, I didn't have a laptop there with me. And so I was back to pen and paper. And I had picked up a couple of books specifically to keep as journals for that. So I had something to go back to. I had blog entries, I had Facebook posts, I had those little booklets. So I didn't have a single log like we do as divers. But I was able to pull stuff together, which was good.
Little cocktail napkins from the bar in Singapore and all those different places. Did is there a blackout when you're on the North and South Pole? Is there like you can't use your cell phone and stuff like that, or you have full communication when you're up there?
No, there was when I was there in Antarctica in 2014 and at the North Pole in 2016, communications were very, 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 very limited. I believe now in Antarctica they've set up something where you can pay for internet access, but you're going to pay through the nose. It's very, very expensive
Yeah.
to do it. But when I was there, there was no communication. I mean, they had satellite phones for the staff, but I didn't have any comms, so I was blacked out of the internet completely, which was a good thing. There was a nice little detox.
Or you would have been saying,
Similar
"Come
situation.
get me out of here."
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, um, the tricky part about that is the weather in these places is very unpredictable, and you can get stuck there. And if you've got flight reservations to get you, like, from Chile back to Texas, back to Taiwan, back to Singapore, then getting stuck in Antarctica means you've got to call somebody. So knowing that there was going to be this blackout, I had set up in advance with a friend of mine such that if anything happened, I could get 1 minute on the sat phone to call him and say, "You've got all the plans, go make the changes." I didn't need to do that in Antarctica. At the North Pole, on the other hand, due to some interesting climate conditions there, I was supposed to be there for about 36 hours, and I was there for about 4.5 days because the ice cracked at our base camp and it wrecked our runway.
Oh shit!
So the plane couldn't come back, and we were stranded there for a few days. So that was a case where I did get on the sat phone and I called back to my friend Ethan, the one who got me to start running in the first place. And I said, "Okay, this is all your fault because you got me to start running. So you're the one that's going to have to deal with this." And And he, I got about 1 minute on the phone to him, and I said,
Uh,
execute, plan B, and he started calling the airlines to make changes. The problem we ran into there is that Ethan is originally from Vietnam, and when he called the airline and said, "My name is William Thomas," they did not believe him because of his accent. So he had to send them the recording of the voicemail that I'd left him, that we'd been stranded at the North Pole, because they don't believe any of the story. They're like, "Well, my friend is stuck at the North Pole and he can't get back and he's not going to
right.
make his flight." And they're like, "We're not buying this." Um,
Yeah, honest, he works
so
for Santa Claus part-time. He's an elf. He's in the North Pole. He's at Santa's village. Yeah, I totally can believe all that.
yeah, so that the lack of comms is unfortunate. But it's the nature of the beast, and you're in places that very few people are ever going to go to. There's simply not going to be an infrastructure there. And in fact, in the liability waiver that we signed for the North Pole, it explicitly said you are going to a place where man is not meant to be. And I took that very seriously. Yeah, I took that very seriously.
So what would happen then? I mean, I guess if you're in the South Pole, they could try to rush you to Chile if something happens. But when you're in the North Pole and your runway just happens to disappear because the North Pole is shaking and moving all the time, what happens if there's emergency? I mean, what do you do?
In that case, you're pretty much stuck there. And
I think they call that shit out of luck.
pretty much, yeah, yeah. They had there was a doctor there, and this was a camp that was run at the time. It was run by a Russian group, the Russian Geographical Society, and they had a doctor there, at the camp, and they called him Doctor Chop, um, because if something went wrong, there wasn't a way out of there, so he would just, amputate the offending limb, I guess, and
That's
there
so
really
comfortable.
was.
You're gonna have to
Yeah,
go see Dr. Chop.
Dr. Chop's going to take care of you.
I
But
don't
that was
want.
something, they were the organizers of this race, and the organizer of those races at the time was a fellow named Richard Donovan, and he put together both of those. He's since stepped back from them, but he makes it very clear to people. It's like when you go there, you're there, and don't plan anything for a week or two afterwards. Have very flexible travel arrangements. And whatever medications you think you need, bring more than you would normally have, because when you're there, you're there. And we put that to the test. Yeah, yeah. Fortunately,
This
we didn't
sounds
have any
like it's
medical conditions. Yeah.
Yeah, this sounds like it's an expensive hobby. I mean, running usually isn't. You have a pair of shorts and a pair of shoes and you can just run anywhere you want. But this type of craziness, it sounds like this would be an expensive hobby. I mean, because there must be some outfit that you have to hire to go to the North or South Pole or a lot of these other places, right? I mean, is there a special runners discount or runners group, or how do you even get to these places?
Yeah. Um, so getting down to Antarctica, first of all, is a little bit easier. There's a camp that's established at a place called Union Glacier, and it's put in the same place every year. So they've got the structures there. They'll take down the tents at the end of the season, but they'll fly in and put them back up then at the beginning of the next season. So it's a pretty structured environment there. And there's an aircraft that flies from Punta Arenas, Chile, into Union Glacier. They land on a 3 mile ice runway. When I went in, it was an old Russian military plane, military cargo plane that would come in and out about every 4 or 5 days. Now they've got something a little more modern, and I think they run a more regular schedule than that, maybe even every day, weather
When
permitting.
you
It's about
get
a
on,
four and a half hour
do you have
flight.
to hand the pilot a bottle of vodka like the old days when you get on the flight? You just hand the pilot, here's some vodka, just don't hurt us, right? I mean,
Yeah, I waited until I was getting off the plane because I didn't want him getting into the rations as we were on the way down there. Yeah, yeah. But you get on the plane in Chile and it's, pretty warm there. And then you've got to have all of your gear on, because as soon as you land and you open the door, you're in Antarctica. And you got to have everything with you right there. So So you get in and out of there, and it was a pretty interesting environment. And the living situation was, two-man tents, and it was pretty easy there. North Pole is a bit different. Every year they'll use satellite imagery and airborne reconnaissance to find a place to put the camp because the ice is always shifting. The difference is there's no land there; it's just ice on top of water. So they have to find a spot close to the pole. And I say close to the pole because it's always going to be moving. So we started out, 30 kilometers from the North Pole. We ended maybe 30, 37 miles. The camp keeps moving. And so they'll parachute in. These guys who are just amazing will parachute in and they'll parachute in some bulldozers and they'll carve out a runway and they'll set up some tents. And then the plane will come in with the initial supplies. And they run this camp for about a month until the sun, which has been up for 24 hours a day, weakens the ice to the point that it couldn't hold an airplane anymore. And then they pack up and fly back out again. But for us as runners, we come in from Svalbard, Norway, which is the northernmost town in the world. It's a little place, a little archipelago off the northwestern coast of Norway. It's about a 2.5 hour flight into the pole from there. And anybody going to the pole goes from there. So there's us, there's the marathoners, but there are also different explorers, scientists, people who are trekking the last degree. So they'll start at 89 degrees north and they'll make their way up to 90.00 at the North Pole. There are some pretty amazing people who go in there. Coming back to your question about the expense and what it costs to do that, what I discovered was that the North Pole Marathon was just about the cheapest way to get to the North Pole. And in fact, there was one lady in the race who had started running marathons simply so she could go to the North Pole because this was the only way she could imagine getting there.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
So I just want to get this straight. So
Yeah.
if you go to the North Pole, you only have to go to the North Pole?
I'm sorry, one more time.
When you go to the North Pole, you only have a 1 month window to get to the North Pole, and then that camp is shut down and see you later?
Yes, and that has proven to be a challenge. So for
Yeah.
us,
So, and you said they
yeah,
drop these guys with parachutes. So are they
yeah,
dropping the bulldozers? They're dropping everything from a plane. Then these guys set up, and then you land?
yes, that is
That's
correct. That is what
incredible.
they do. Yeah, these guys are they're these guys are crazy. And I loved them to
Now,
death.
are they
This is
Russians? Are they Americans? Who's doing this?
Yeah, so at the time, it was a Russian group, and I think it's probably still the same people. It's just that the owner of the business is different. But at the time, yeah, these were guys who had been doing like they'd probably been in the Russian military. They've been soldiers in Arctic units, and they were used to this. They were comfortable with this, and I'm glad they were because I'm not. And somebody's got to do it, and it wasn't going to be me. So. Um, but yeah, you've got that 1 month window. And
God,
so
that's
they would get
crazy.
in and they'd set it up. And we actually sat in Svalbard for an extra week because the ice had cracked open a couple of times and messed up the runway and they had to rebuild. So when we got there and we got stranded, what happened to us had already happened twice. And it had delayed us. And of course, we're sitting there in Svalbard, and all these other people who are going to the North Pole behind us are also coming in, and there aren't a lot of hotel rooms. So there was a lot of doubling up on the floors of cabins and so forth. And then we got in. Now, there have been years where the marathon didn't get run, in part because of the climate conditions and the condition of the ice. In other cases, there were political challenges. When we were there, the camp was run by Russians. The airplane was actually run by a Ukrainian company. Um, that stopped
That could
a
get
few years
awkward.
ago. Yeah, yeah. So that created some problems a few years ago. But they ran again this year, and they're back on track and doing great stuff. So I'm happy to see people back at the North Pole. I got a buddy that I ran with on Mount Everest last year who had been trying to get to the North Pole, and his race had been canceled 3 or 4 times, everything from the ice to COVID to politics, and he finally got to go earlier this year, and I'm just so happy for him. Couldn't be prouder of him.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Now you're a lieutenant, retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. Are you a pilot?
I am not. No, my
Okay.
vision was horrendous, like Coke bottle glasses kind of things. And you got to have perfect vision to be a pilot. So that didn't happen for me.
Okay, so you were watching these guys praying. You weren't like the guy in the back going, "Oh, I know what they're doing. This is going to be great." You're like, "Dang, I hope these guys know what they're doing because
I
that's
really hope they know what they're
crazy."
doing. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you were doing I don't know if this is even crazier than the North or South Pole, but the Mount Everest Marathon. Now,
Yeah.
are you going by frozen bodies as you're running? I mean, I don't mean to make that funny about people dying
Right.
on Mount Everest, but I mean, honestly, that how high up are you running Mount Everest Marathon?
Yeah, so what we do for the Everest Marathon is we trek up to the Everest Base Camp, and that's actually where the starting line is going to be. So we take about 9 days. We fly into a town called Lukla, which is the starting point, and we take 9 days to trek up to the Everest Base Camp. We spend the night there, and that's at about 5,700 meters. Gosh, I'm trying to think. It's over 17,000 feet. And we spend the night there, and then we start the next day. And we basically, having spent 9 days hiking up the mountain, we spend the day running back down. Um, and I say the day, I took the day. The winner took far less time than that. But the first 20 winners, the first 20 finishers tended to be Nepalese, and some of them were Sherpas, and others were from Kathmandu and other parts of the country. But yeah, you start much higher altitude than I've ever been, except in an airplane, and training for that when you live at sea level, as I do, is a bit of a challenge, that's for sure. The weather was manageable. We were up there in May, and it's actually a very nice time to be up there on the mountain. Um, but we didn't go above base camp, and I'm okay with that. I've seen that movie, and I don't want to be a part of that.
I've seen that
Yeah,
movie. Yeah, right.
yeah,
Oh my goodness,
yeah.
great. My son did ranger training.
Ah,
And, they had to they starved him, beat him, dehydrated him, put him in, and he had to train in four different zones. You know what I'm talking about? Desert,
right.
mountains, ocean, he had four different types of environments, zones, whatever, back to back to back. And it was brutal. That was a pretty wicked training. But, I mean, you're doing like it's impossible to train for the cold of, the North and South Pole. And again, we talked about the dehydration factor because it is a desert. People do not realize how dry it is there, wicked on the skin and stuff like that. But the altitude, I mean, you almost need to train in a hyperbolic chamber. I mean, you get above 15,000 feet, and the air, I think, drops in half, right? The oxygen drops in half. I mean, you get
Yeah.
17, 18,000 feet, you're gasping for air. I mean, what's it like running at that altitude?
It is the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Is the hardest physical activity I've ever had. Um, I did not start off well because, in addition to the altitude and just gasping for breath, it's not like this is a smooth trail that you're running on by any stretch. You're doing the mountain goat thing up and down over rocks, and I had this idea, and again, this is what comes from watching National Geographic, and don't believe everything you see on TV. I had this idea
No.
that for the trek up, oh, it's true. It's not a straight line going up and then a straight line coming back. It's this the whole way. And so I had this idea in my head that I was going to get to the base camp, get to the starting line, and then it was a downhill run for 42 kilometers. And I realized as we were hiking up, I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. This is going to be a lot of up and down. This is going to be climbing over rocks. And then, given how slowly I was running, I actually finished in the dark. So my last 2 hours of the race were in the dark. Now I had a headlamp and a flashlight in my hand, but
Oh, shit.
um, yeah, I'm like, okay, don't suddenly turn left because there's nothing there. And
Even the mountain goats don't walk around at night up there. All
they
right.
don't.
They
I
know
didn't.
not to go wandering around up there at night.
They know better than they're smarter than I am. Yeah. But in terms of training for the altitude, something I'd looked into here in Singapore is there actually is an oxygen or an altitude house, I guess they call it, that the some of the Olympic athletes here will use for their training. But not being Singaporean and not being an Olympic athlete by any stretch of the imagination, I wasn't able to do that. There are some training methods though that I have since discovered that will help, and they're really designed to help you build lung capacity. It's putting on a mask, restricting your oxygen flow while you're running on the treadmill. But it would have been useful. Something like that could have been very useful. We had people who were not able to start the race. We had people who had to turn back during those 9 days. We had one person who had to be evacuated out of the base camp by chopper because of altitude sickness. They, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not, they have lost people before. They've had people pass away during this. It's, yeah, it's a little tricky to get yourself ready for that physically and mentally both.
That's just a little tricky. It just I don't want to exaggerate. It was just a little tricky. But I mean, honestly, it's like that's a really wicked environment. That's why it's one of the toughest things on the planet to do is climb Mount Everest. So they made you hike up there. That's the only way to get to base camp is you have to hike there, and it took 9 days to hike to the base camp. So you've
Yeah, and
got
that's
these
on
Sherpas
purpose.
and you're going up to the base camp. So you had to were you did I'm sure they told you that. Did you train for that type of hike?
I I did my best. I did the best I could do in Singapore. Again, no mountains here. Um, so, what I did was just basically I was trying to get comfortable with my gear. So, with the boots, with the trekking poles, carrying the pack, and doing it for extended periods. We would typically be hiking for maybe 6 hours a day, 5 or 6 hours a day. But of course, it's uphill for most of that. The idea behind the 9 day trek is that you've got to acclimate to the altitude on the way up. That's the only way to do it. If you were to just take a helicopter and go to the base camp and get out of the helicopter, you would not last very long.
Yeah.
That's a good way to die. And even the choppers going up there will go up with oxygen tanks in the helicopter. So you've got to go up there slowly. You've got to take that time. There are a couple days along the way. They call them rest days. I chuckle at that because it's not like you're sitting around the town chuckle, just resting. Um, the idea is on that rest day, you're going to sleep at the same altitude again that night, but you're going to climb higher and then come back down. So you climb high, sleep low. And we use those two rest days at a town called Namche and then another small village called Dingbushe to go higher and get used to running. We would actually practice running a bit at that altitude and then come back down, spend the night, and then take off for the next day's hike. But yeah, that is done on purpose, and they're checking you very carefully along the way, checking your oxygen content of your blood. They've got doctors in different towns along the way to keep an eye on you. But you need that 9 days to get up there, and then yeah, the one day coming back is a pretty good day. It's a long day for me, but it's a good day.
9 days
I should
going
point
up
out,
one
by the
day.
yeah,
Yeah.
one day coming back. Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was actually the last place finisher of the 2024 Everest Marathon. If you look on the list, I'm the last one there. And that was when I discovered that last place finisher is still finisher.
Yeah.
And
100%, brother.
I was
100%.
okay
And
with that.
yeah, because there were people who didn't even start. There were people who didn't make it down the hill. And I
Yeah.
think that obviously that removes any question that people must ask you all the time of what was your toughest marathon. Um, but but that's kind of the basis of your book, right? I mean, the basis of your book is kind of, hey man, don't quit. And if I can do this, you laugh and very self-depreciating or whatever the word is, that, oh, I'm just the average Joe, I'm not really an athlete. Dude, you're way totally an athlete. But really, I mean, that's pretty much the foundation and a lot of what your book's about, right? That determination.
Exactly. And what I'm hoping is that people will read that and see themselves in that book. I'm not writing this to say you should go out and run marathons. In fact, I never advise somebody to run marathons. That's a personal decision. You've got to decide that for yourself. But what I do advise people to do is find something that makes your life interesting. Find something that you've wanted to do, but you haven't let yourself do it or you haven't believed you can do it. And then go out and try it. because chances are, if you don't believe you can do it, you probably haven't tried hard enough. Odds are you can get out there. Now there are going to be limitations, certainly. There are things that age is going to perhaps limit you on, or certain physical conditions will limit you on, but you shouldn't limit yourself. You shouldn't be the limiting factor. Your brain should not be the limiting factor. And I'm always excited to see people get out and do something new. And one of the great things about doing these races around the world, and especially the North Pole and Antarctica and Everest, is I meet the most amazing people who are doing this. So they've done incredible things that I can't imagine doing. And then suddenly I start to imagine it. So surround yourself with people who do cool things, and that'll help you to do cool things as well. It was my friend Ethan who had just decided to run a marathon and then told me I should run one with him next year. Everybody needs an Ethan. So find your Ethan, and that'll
Well,
help
what was a
have that
what
spark.
was a bigger stretch? What was a bigger stretch for you? I'm gonna start running marathons, or I'm gonna write a book.
For me, the biggest stretch was I'm going to start running marathons. And the reason I say that is I got my PhD about 20 some years ago. So I've written a book length manuscript before. I was a professor at the Air Force Academy and then at Georgetown when I retired. So I've written a lot. So writing was something I'm actually fairly comfortable with. The self-discipline involved in writing, though, is very similar to the self-discipline you need to get ready for a marathon. I started off slowly on writing the book, and then I realized if I wanted to have it available by Christmas, I kind of needed to have it done by October, and it was now June. So maybe I need to get this thing finished.
That's blazing fast to write a book. I
Yeah,
know guys who take
yeah,
4 or 5 years to write a book.
yeah. Now I got it done in I'd say it was within a year because I'd started it before I went to the North Pole. I can remember sitting at a cafe in Svalbard working on a chapter that was in April of 2016, and then by October I'd finished the manuscript, and it was out and available on Amazon in November. So I had gotten started, but I had to pick up the pace during that summer of 2016 and really get it done. Yeah, yeah.
That's so
But
Ernest Hemingway of you. It's just so Ernest Hemingway. Hanging out in bars around the world, writing your story. But I love the message. There's a dude's book's right up there. You heard of John Brink? You ever talked to John?
yes, I haven't
John's a
talked to him,
great
but I've
guy.
heard of him. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, John's a great guy. So he's 85, and he started working out like in his 60s. And which when you're 85, that's still 25 years ago. But I mean, literally started to focus on health. And yeah, then he became like a competitive bodybuilder in his 80s and was like the oldest guy to win the Arnold's
Mm,
bodybuilding champion and stuff like that. So there really isn't a limit, except what you put on your mind. And I love that because you are, let's face it, you're an average guy. You're not an Olympian. You're not, a Nigerian who runs from village to village. I mean, you're a dude
right.
who goes at 42. Yeah, most guys can't get off the couch anymore, right? I mean, most guys can't. And I think I love your message so much because I think, after COVID, I think so many people kind of had that feeling, right? I mean, so many people were like, yeah, this sucked. I think I need to re-examine stuff, take a
Mm,
different look at stuff. And what you're telling people is if you're gonna look around at stuff, don't limit it, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that especially as I've been here in Asia for the last 14 years, I feel like the message that I'm sharing is an important one because the cultures over here are all different, right? I mean, I can walk across the bridge from Singapore to Malaysia, and I'm in a very, very different place. But there are some commonalities. And one of those is that going out and trying new things and standing out is not really common. It's not always encouraged. The idea is, do what you need to do to get by, do the basics and do them well, but don't try to be that guy or that special person. And so I think a lot of people look at what they could do in their lives and they don't reach for something big. And they'll see people on social media doing stuff and they'll think, oh, what if I could do that? But then they're not always encouraged to take that next step. And what I've tried to do over here, whether it's giving talks or writing the book or doing a podcast like this, is just try to get the message out there that, man, don't limit yourself. And I think you're right about COVID. It showed us that, our time on this planet is finite. And there will often be things that will limit us that are outside of our control. So why do we let the things that are within our control limit us? That's silly. And I think a lot of people picked up on that. So that's good. That's good. COVID bad, but the message coming out of it is good.
Yes, a lot of, COVID was bad, but so many great things came out of COVID. I mean, I think a lot of really good things came out of the lockdowns and the stuff that happened. I think it woke a lot of people up, which is a healthy thing. And I think your message is great for the younger people because people under 30 are so lost. It's a real lost generation, and I think people, the younger generation, especially hearing your message and saying, don't lose hope. I know the world seems crazy. I know, AI is going to take your future and all the stuff that's going on. You can't buy a house until you're 50, but don't let that bog you down, right? Will
Yeah.
Thomas is going to tell you, you could get out there and do anything. Don't limit your thought process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I never would have thought as a very unathletic kid that I would be looking at sports. I'd be looking at fitness as the source of, the lessons that would guide me through life and the messages that would get me up in the morning and get me moving. But I'm seeing it. And, and you talk about different folks. You had a guest recently, Jeffrey Weiss, the Ironman triathlete. And he was just awesome. And he said what he put into words what I've been trying to put into words, which is he said, I don't really believe that, that everything is possible. But I think a lot more is possible than you realize. And I love that because, people talk about thinking outside the box and, sometimes the box is there for a reason, right? I mean, I worked in the government and there are limitations on what you can do, but you can push the edges of that box, or you can get away from the center of the box out to the far reaches and still be within the realm of the possible, but doing something that's pretty incredible. I mean, I will never forget the moment that I stepped off the airplane onto the runway in Antarctica, looking around thinking, my God, this is what the moon looks like.
Yeah.
I will never forget coming over a rise and looking down and seeing the Everest base camp, my destination for that day, right in front of me, thinking this was on the cover of National Geographic when I was 7 years old, and I'm here. And this continues to amaze me, as I think back, and conversations like this really get me to reflect a lot more on those experiences. There are so many things that I never would have imagined. And now I've done them. And again, if I can do that, anybody can. Anybody can.
Brother, that gave me goosebumps, man. This gave me the God chills. That's a great message. And it almost takes away my last question because I lied earlier. I said I only had one question, but I'm a liar. I lie. I do have one last question, and maybe you've already said it, but maybe not. But so my last question, sir, is if there was a thought that Will Thomas would like to leave us with, something that this means a lot to you, a saying, just something that means something to Will Thomas that you carry, what would that last thought be?
I think it would be run the mile that you're in.
What was that?
And run the mile that you're in. And what I mean by that is, when I'm running a marathon, well, I keep saying 42 kilometers. For folks in the US, it's 26 miles. At mile 1, you can't be worrying about mile 25. You got to get through mile 1. and then get through mile 2, and then get through mile 3. And I'm not saying that you don't look ahead. I mean, most of my military career was spent as a strategic planner. I'm a big fan of plans. I love having plans. But for the plan down the road to happen, the thing right in front of you has to happen first. And so whether you're, looking for a job or taking exams in school or whatnot, take care of what's right in front of you and don't worry as much about what's going to happen down the road. You got to get through what's happening right now. I remember I had a professor, I was studying Russian when I was in college, and I was not doing very well. I was not the best student of Russian. And my professor said to me, she said, I know what your problem is. She says, you get into a test, you can't answer something, and you sit there and you start thinking, oh my gosh, I can't answer this question. I'm going to fail this test. I'm going to fail this course. I'm going to fail out of school. I'm going to lose my scholarship. And she said, you just need to move on to the next question. And she was absolutely right. And that really hit home for me when I started running, and especially in some races where I had some trouble early on. And I thought, I can't focus on mile 30. I've got to get through mile 14. And so run the mile that you're in, I think is gonna give you a lot of clarity, and it's going to give you more focus, and it's going to help you get over obstacles that are immediately in front of you, so then you can tackle the later ones when the time is right.
Dude, did you trademark that? Because I'm gonna so steal that.
I think it's I think it's lesson number 17 in my 26.2 lessons from marathons, chapter 2 of the book. Yeah.
Is it?
But it's one
Right
that's
on.
important for me.
Run the mile you are in. Dang. Yeah. Wow. I love that. I love that. It reminds me of what Zig Ziglar used to say when Zig Ziglar's wife, he always just called her the redhead, right? You never even knew what
Mhm.
Zig Ziglar's wife named. She was just a redhead. And one day the redhead said, "You're fat." He said, "Well, I'm going to take up running." She's like, "I don't want some fat husband of mine running down the street." She goes, "No, I'm going to do it." So she put his shoes right in front of the bed. So when he got up in the morning, his feet had to go right by the shoe into the shoes, right? And he said, "The first day I ran to the mailbox, went home. Next day ran to the neighbor's mailbox, ran home. And the next day I ran to the third." He goes, just one at a time, just one at a time, those little bites, and run the mile you're in. That is a great saying, my friend. I love it. But did you talk to the pilots in Russian, by the way, when you were going up to Antarctica? Did you have any Russian
Uh,
left?
I had a little bit left. I didn't talk to the pilots as much, but I did talk to Dr. Chop, and he was a pretty good guy. And the staff there at the camp, I tried my Russian with them, and they looked at me like I was crazy because I think the accent was wrong and probably the words too.
That's awesome. Oh, Will Thomas, you've been an absolute joy, man. This has been so great. So, what is next for Will Thomas? What you have cooking? What do you have coming up? And where can we find Will Thomas and all your great stuff?
Yeah, so I'm going to be around Asia for the foreseeable future. I've got my next race coming up here in a few weeks in Taipei, so I'll be up there. It'll be my first time running in Taiwan. Very excited about that. One of the things that's just come up on the radar screen for me is that I had completed the 6 World Marathon Majors, the Abbott World Marathon Majors, and those are the six biggest in the world. There is now a seventh. The Sydney Marathon is the newest addition to the series of races, and I've run Sydney before, but that was 13 years ago. And now that it's a major, I got to run it again. So the ballot just opened for that yesterday. I'm going to get my name into the lottery. If I don't get the lottery, then I'll be running them for a charity. But I got to get down to Sydney and got to run that again. So that's the next big one. And then by the end of next year, so I'm turning 60 next year, my goal is to run my 50th marathon while I'm 60. So Project 5060, I call it. I've got my 45th one coming up here pretty quick. And then I've got one more this year, and I've got 4 scheduled for next year. So I should get 50 by the time I'm 60. That's the plan. But I do keep a page out there on Facebook. I keep an athlete page. Just look for Dr. William Thomas, and you'll find me there. So I've got my adventures. I've got adventures of my friends that I see them out running around. Try and share some training tips and maybe just some fun stories from Singapore along the way. Yeah, and then the book, of
Nice.
course, is available on Amazon. Yeah.
Right, right. Yep. That's where I found the book is on Amazon. And are you speaking? Are you starting to get out there and tell your story around town, or are you going to start doing the speaking?
I had done that. So I had my own business for about 6 years here in Asia, where I was an executive coach and doing leadership training. And I started giving talks based on running once the book came out. And then I got recruited back into the corporate world. So I was working for The Economist for a couple of years, and I was working for Amazon for 3 years. And big companies don't always like it when you go out and give talks publicly. So I've stepped back from that, but I think I am going to get out and start doing some more, not for a fee, but I mean just to, volunteer groups and boys and girls clubs and, things like that, where I think, it's good to get the message out there. And, again, you've had some people who've come in with great messages like Jeffrey. I keep coming back to Jeffrey Weiss. So I kind of I want to be as impactful as he can be. So yeah, I see some opportunities for that.
That's awesome. But everybody, you just were blessed with some time because you got to catch them while you can because he's always running. As Will Thomas, and Will has done the Marathon Grand Slam. He's run on all seven continents and the North Pole when he can get out of there. He's done the Abbott World Marathon Majors, the Grand Slam. He's run the Mount Everest Marathon. We still don't know why. He's he's the author of Cross the Lines, and he's also just a really good dude. So Will Thomas, thank you so much for joining us here on the What If You Could podcast. I really appreciate your time. And thanks for joining us all the way from Singapore, man.
Well, thanks so much for making the time to have me on. And I love the question that is the basis for this show and for this talk. And I hope everybody asks themselves that question, because the results can be pretty amazing.
Well, my goal is to ask 1 million people that question. So you're number 246. I got a lot of way to go. But if
You got a ways
but
to go.
you got your 50 and 60. So if you can run 50 marathons before the age of 60 and cover the whole entire planet, I can somehow reach 1 million people. I'm 62 years old, so I better hurry up. All right, my friend. Thank you so much, Will Thomas. It's been a pleasure, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day ahead.
All right, see you guys.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of What If You Could podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and give us any feedback. We'd love to hear it. And remember, if you can dream it, you can do it. See you next time.